Hi, welcome to our Goodpush Toolkit on social inclusion. This session will provide an introduction to the idea of social inclusion, so we'll look at what that means and then why it's important to be inclusive in your skate project. And then we'll go quickly over some reasons why skateboarding can be helpful in doing this. The toolkit will then focus in on two specific examples of inclusion. So firstly, girls' inclusion, where we'll hear from the Afghanistan team in Afghanistan, and then disability inclusion, where we'll hear from a teen in Cambodia. Then we'll offer up a few tips and some next steps. So before we go into the presentation, just a quick question to get you thinking about your own project is whether it is as inclusive and diverse as you want it to be. And maybe this is something you've already thought about before. Maybe it's a new idea that you're looking into, but hopefully the next slides will be helpful for you. So if we're going to talk about social inclusion for the next little while, it's good to make sure that everyone has a clear idea of what it means. So actually, social inclusion is just finding ways to encourage all individuals and groups to take part in something. So we're talking about specifically your programs or your project, but also ideally in larger society. You want people to be able to take part. And programs that are inclusive provide opportunities and dignity to people who are facing discrimination and inequality otherwise. So to go a bit from the theory to the practice, what does this look like? On the left, you'll see some typical categories of people that often face discrimination and exclusion. And then in the middle, you'll see common barriers that are linked up with why people are excluded from certain things or not able to access certain things. And then on the right, you'll see examples of what people can be excluded from. So they might have limited rights, limited access to education, to work, and also face abuse and neglect, harassment, many other things. So before we talk about how to be inclusive, it's worth talking about why we should be inclusive. So the current reality is that a lot of children and youth are marginalized, and as a result, they're lacking opportunities for learning, play, and basically reaching their full potential. Things like poverty, social norms, conflict can really limit the access that young people have to safe and free spaces where they can play and learn, make friends. Also, around the world, gender inequality is a big problem, and special steps are usually needed to help girls overcome the really deep social and cultural barriers that exist and often prevent their ability to take part in sport and education. Yeah, basically overall, the reality is that unless you make special efforts to reach groups that are usually on the fringes of society, you're really unlikely to reach those people who will benefit most from your skate project. And skateboarding projects really have a chance to be a part of the solution. By encouraging diversity within the people that come to your project, you're helping to build trust and friendships, which are really essential to overcoming prejudices and divisions that exist in society. And this is a really important step to counter discrimination and things like gender equality as well. And as most of you already know, I'm sure, skateboarding and sports in general are really successful at building community among people that are very different from each other. And lastly, if you can change the preconceptions or prejudices that people have when they're young, this can really shift the mindsets in society for the future generations. So why is skateboarding a good tool for social inclusion? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but a few of the more unique ones include that it is a very accessible activity. So it only really requires the board and some hard ground that you can skate on. And, it's really something that people of all abilities can do. You don't even have to stand on it. You can sit on it. You can do whatever as long as you're having fun. The second aspect is that skateboarding for most people is non-competitive. Most of us are just challenging ourselves when we go skate, and we are learning at our own pace. This also helps to build community across different backgrounds and different skate abilities, whereas maybe more competitive team sports don't have that as much. Thirdly, skateboarding is a relatively new sport, In some countries and communities, it's actually a very new sport. And this means, for example, that it's less likely for skateboarding to be seen as a sport just for boys. And this is what Skatistan found in Afghanistan was when we started doing our sessions in the street there, no one had seen a skateboard before. And at the time, it wasn't socially acceptable for girls to do most sports like basketball or riding a bicycle or playing football or soccer. Whereas skateboarding was seen as just a toy, so there wasn't a reason why girls couldn't do it. Lastly, skateboarding also builds a lot of valuable life skills. So, firstly, confidence, but definitely also perseverance from, trying to learn tricks and falling or failing over and over and over again. This can be really useful in the rest of our lives. And obviously, creativity. I think a lot of us see skateboarding as more of an art form than a sport. And this creativity is a very useful skill that we can bring to things like problem solving. So as I mentioned before, this presentation will focus on two different groups that are often marginalized. And we'll start here with girls' inclusion in skate programs. There are a lot of different barriers preventing girls from taking part in skateboarding or other recreational activities, especially sports. In many communities, to start with the physical barriers, for example, it being hard for girls to travel alone, for whether it's for security or reasons or family restrictions. Also, a lot of times skate parks are not in the nicest areas, so this can make girls feel maybe scared to go there on their own. And often girls have more obligations to help out at home, and that can make it harder for them to get permission to attend a recreational program. So moving on to social barriers, these can be community ideals about girls and sport and whether this is something they should be doing. It can be limitations on the ability of girls to interact with boys. So if there's not a girls-only space, then girls may just not be allowed to come at all. Even in your team, there can be barriers here because of social values. So, for example, maybe some of your teachers or volunteers don't think that girls should be skateboarding. Maybe they worry more about them getting hurt. Maybe it's much harder for you to get female staff or volunteers because they can't get permission to come and work, or they can't travel as freely as men. And psychological barriers to girls taking part in a skate program can be things like girls lacking the confidence. So maybe they've never done anything like that, and especially if it's a very male-dominated space, it can be intimidating. And also, if there's any bullying or harassment that happens when they come to this space, that can really prevent girls from coming back. So our experience at Skatistan is that right from the very start, we had a goal to have 50% girls involved. This is something that we wanted to do, and we were aware that in order to achieve this, we needed to invest much more time and resources into getting girls to our programs than boys. But even after years and years of working on this as a goal, sometimes at some of our sites, we still only had 45% girls coming each week. And so we realized that to actually have 50% attendance, we need to have a goal of more like 55 or 60% girls registered with us, because there's so many more factors that prevent girls from attending. And now we've been able to achieve 50% attendance every week. So on average, we have around 740 girls that come to Skatistan at our 4 locations across Afghanistan, Cambodia, and South Africa. To do this, a big factor has been having over 50% female staff. So all of our skate classes for girls have female teachers, and this has been really effective. And through this effort to get girls involved, Skatistan and other projects like it are changing preconceptions worldwide of what a skateboarder looks like. So when I started skateboarding over 20 years ago, the image of a skater was very much a teenage boy from America, most likely white. So I think now we have a lot of different ideas on who can be a skateboarder, because we're seeing different images coming out there. And now we're going to hear a short conversation between Nurzai and Zara, who work with Skatistan Mazar-e Sharif in Afghanistan, about their experiences getting girls involved in their skateboarding and other programs there.
Hi, my name is Nurzai. I'm program officer at Mazar-e Sharif site. Hi, Zara.
Hi.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Of course. I am Zahra, the community educator of Skatistan in Mazar site.
What do you think? How many girls come to Skitistan Mazar each week?
We have almost more than 300 female students coming to Uzbekistan each week.
How does Skitistan get so many girls to come here?
It has many reasons. Our transport for female students is very important. If we give them transport, they will come, and if we don't give them transport, maybe we will have very less female students. In Afghanistan, the families don't like their girls to walk very long or to go to other places that they don't know, and also for the security problems, the girls cannot go very long, as our students are very young. And the educators, their behavior, and the trust that educators and also Uzbekistan side build between students and each side is very important to have students, more students, especially females.
Okay, thank you. What are some challenges to keeping girls involved a long time?
As my experience, as in 2 years, the parents' problem, they sometimes cannot believe on us, or they hear something that people say to them, and sometimes if the security is not good, they cannot trust the community to send their girls to Uzbekistan or somewhere like here. One of the big problems is it's a taboo for our community, for especially very old people, to send their girls, young girls, to somewhere and to support, or even they don't send their young girls to go to school. They expect them to get married or stay at home and learn the home things.
Good. What advice can you give to other people that want to get more girls to attend their skate programs?
I think the events are very good for having more female students, to have parents, to have some community people in that, and build trust on each other. And also having good communication with the parents and community, especially for mullah imams, it is very important, because usually they are the people that have a lot of effect on the people's mind. If we have their trust, we can have that community's trust also, their parents and those students that come from that community. And also the educators, the behavior between an educator and a student is also very important. If educator have good behavior, the students will like to come.
So moving on now from talking about girls' inclusion to disability inclusion, to give a very brief historical overview, in 1948, after World War II, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed, and in this declaration, it ensured the rights to free education for all children. This included special education for children with disabilities. So the idea there was that it would be separate but equal. Children with disabilities would get access to education, but it would be separate. Over time, perspectives started to shift from separation towards integration or inclusion. So in 2005, the UN Disability Convention was signed, which promotes the rights of people with disabilities and mainstreams disability in development. Part of this is the Education for All model, which provides the rights for people with disabilities to have access to regular mainstream programs if they wish to. And this is a very important shift. However, people with disabilities, of course, are not all the same. And the key thing here is having choices. So, looking a bit more at separation versus integration, whether people want to have kind of separate services versus being integrated into the mainstream services, that depends a lot on community and identities. So while in many cases people with various disabilities want to have the option to take part, for example, in a regular skateboarding class with, other kids, in other cases there can be a preference to have their own services or their own spaces. An example of this is deaf communities, where in many cases they may prefer to have their own spaces and their own activities. And this is in large part because they have their own language and they're communicating with each other. And there's a whole deaf culture that they want to preserve and build on. Another important point to talk about when we're thinking about disability inclusion is that actually, as human beings, all of us have different learning styles, and this is a useful concept to think about. So, when working with young people with different disabilities, you can think of it as accommodating different learning styles. So, you see this image on the right, it shows that we have our different senses. For example, some people learn better by listening to something, some people learn better by talking about the thing that they're trying to learn about. Some people are super hands-on, others are very visual, others really want to break down the logic. And some of us prefer to learn alone, some of us prefer to learn in groups. So there's all these different factors that are going on. And it's not only important when you're working with children with disabilities to be thinking of teaching for many different learning styles, but when you're teaching anybody, because in a typical class or group of 20 kids, you're going to have such a range. So when you're creating your activities and programs, it's really useful concept to think about how you can make it diverse and have some parts that are hands-on, some that are visual, some that are, working alone, some working in groups, these kinds of things. So now you'll hear a short interview with Teen, who is the programs officer of Skateistan Cambodia. And Skateistan Cambodia has really been the leader in terms of running skate programs for kids with disabilities. They have a great program in partnership with the School for the Deaf in Phnom Penh. They've had a long-term partnership with NGO partners that have participants with both cognitive and physical disabilities. So they have a lot of experience to learn from. Teen, maybe you could just introduce yourself for the listeners.
Hello, my name is Tin. I am the program officer at Skateistan Cambodia, and I have been working with Skateistan almost 6 years.
And so you've been working, for quite a long time with Skateistan Cambodia. And how has Skateistan Cambodia included children with disabilities in its programs?
Yeah, in Cambodia, we have people who living with disability without anyone supporting them. So the reason that we try to include people with disability to our program, we just want to try to motivate them through skateboard, because we are equal, and we want to bring their voice up in the community. We want to build their capacity.
Great. And what was it like for you as an educator teaching skateboarding to kids with disabilities at first?
I have noticed in the very beginning that they first started with our program. It was so hard for us because it kind of new experiences, but we get experience by learning. So from them, and we try build our capacity to get more training from the other partnership, to make them feel safe with us. I have noticed since they have joined our program, they have changed a lot. Especially we do some survey every year that to check how do they feel, and it has changed in the beginning, and they get more friends. They could build more their capacity, and they also introduce themselves to the community by joining even with the other kids.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you have any single story of one student with a disability that you've been teaching at Skateistan, or just is there any moment that comes to mind that kind of shows the impact that coming and doing skateboarding and education has had?
Yes, yeah, we have one of the top children that live with disabilities. Of when she first started, she was so afraid to join any sport because she thought that she not be able to do anything like the other kids. She had herself. She didn't like herself, and when she didn't expect that she could get on the board. But since she joined our program, then our educators like try to encourage her, motivate her, and she has a lot of change that she could drop down from the ramp, she could have the other kids, and she got some friends. And her story really impacts to the other kids and motivate the other students that don't ever say give up. You will do it, and you can do it, even just little thing.
So I heard that the word for skateboarding in Cambodian Sign Language was invented by Skateistan students at the School for the Deaf, where we're doing sessions. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Like skateboarding is really new, and all the name of the people or thing they invented by themselves. It's not the same. So when we add our program skateboarding session, they didn't know what skateboarding is. I mean, they didn't know what skateboarding is. So we had a session there, and we wanted them please name our sport in sign language. So they came up something very nice. So it had to do because it's just like a voice record. So we have invented. How do you say invent?
Yeah, invented.
Yes, invented that name, and everyone excited about that name. And we've been practice it since the beginning, and it seemed like it that name increased, like split it like more and more, and they, um, I mean, they put skateboarding in their culture to like sign language to their friends, and they are skating and they use sign language to their friend. It's like a culture. They already built that name into their culture. So they invented this, and they try to expand that to the community, and especially parents, and they understand very well about that sign language. So we are so happy about that. After invented skateboarding in sign language, so we decided we do a mural on the wall that every kid draw, which is really cool. That remind everyone what's skateboarding in sign language.
We're near the end of the social inclusion presentation, and before we finish up, I just wanted to put a few tips out there for how you can make your skate project more inclusive. So the most important thing definitely is just to decide that you want to make your programs more inclusive and to set a goal of what that looks like, or a few goals. Basically, you want to try to make your space an environment where all youth feel welcomed and feel safe. An important tip here is that representation matters. If you want to be including participants or young people, for example, girls or children from minority backgrounds, refugees, the best thing you can do is actually have people from those communities be a part of your teaching and management team. Another tip is to reduce the barriers to participation however you can, and whatever is feasible also within your budget and your resources. So if there is possibility to provide transport to get certain kids to your programs, that's one great way. Look into a girl-friendly design, so maybe some times that are reserved just for girls, and also the option for girls to attend other sessions that aren't necessarily girls only if they want. Obviously, if your programming is free, it will be much more accessible to everybody. And a really good thing you can do here is to also have loaner skateboards. So skateboarding, while it is accessible, it can be expensive for people from low-income backgrounds. And in many countries, it is still really difficult to access good quality skateboards. So having a loaner board system is super helpful. And yeah, just find ways to accommodate all abilities. Have access to your skate park and facilities for people with disabilities. If you can have people on staff who have experience working with physical, cognitive disabilities, people who know sign language, this is all super helpful. Another tip is engage the community. So whoever it is that you're trying to reach, you want to have the larger community involved, the parents, the community leaders. You can get them involved in building the skate park if you're building it yourselves. You can invite them to events, regularly do outreach to the communities where these kids are coming from. Another tip is to encourage interaction across difference. So like we talked just in a few slides before about separation versus integration. Well, it is great to have things like girls only classes or programs for disabled youth. It's also amazing if you can provide opportunities for people from different backgrounds, genders, abilities to mix in the skate park and get to know each other and overcome different preconceptions that they have. And the really important tip is to set the culture in your team. So it's not enough to just, have some kinds of policies or to have one person in your project who's really behind this idea of inclusion. You have to have everybody on board, everyone who's helping to teach the programs, just making sure that all the volunteers and staff understand why including marginalized communities and people is important. And this can involve having some regular trainings as well on how to create a supportive environment. And the last tip is to track your progress. So this will be super motivating for your team to see we only used to have about 10% girls come into our classes and now we have 40%. That's awesome. And it can also help you to figure out what things are working, what things you can improve. Here are a few ideas for next steps on what you can do in terms of social inclusion. So as mentioned before, if you don't have them already, it would be great for you to set some goals for inclusion at your skate project. So think about what you want to accomplish with your organization, who you want to reach through your activities, and what impact you have in mind. And a second next step is to check out some of the other Goodpush toolkits. Some that are especially relevant to social inclusion are firstly community engagement. So this can give you ideas and tips on how you can expand your reach to new demographics. And then also check out the monitoring, evaluation, and learning toolkit, which will give you some tips on figuring out what impact it is that your project wants to achieve if you don't know this yet. And then also how you can measure your progress in terms of social inclusion and everything else. Thanks for watching the social inclusion presentation on the Goodpush Toolkit. If you have any feedback or ideas on other resources that we could provide in this area that would help you, please get in touch. And good luck.